Good evening, everyone. My name is Tracy Hecht, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Management at the John Molson School of Business. I'm also the director of the PhD program in business administration. I'm so pleased to be your moderator for this evening's event, the first in our National Bank Women in Leadership Speaker Series. We're kicking off this series by exploring how employers can support women's career advancement in a hybrid work environment and beyond. I'm excited to be moderating this event that explores a topic so close to my own research, which is about the work-family interface and how it affects people's careers and well-being. We're kicking off this series by exploring how employers can support women's career advancement. Did I just say that? I did. I would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganyo-Gehaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Tonight, you will hear invaluable insights into women's career advancement from our esteemed panelists. I want to point out that October is Women's History Month in Canada. And today, October 18th, is Persons Day. For those who don't know, this day honors October 18th, 1929, when women were officially included in the legal definition of persons for the first time in a decision handed down by Canada's highest court of appeal. I think this timing frames our discussion nicely. It's now my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Sofia Quilico is Regional Vice President, Wealth Management Solutions at National Bank Financial Wealth Management. Sofia is a CPA that began her career at Deloitte in the audit practice. Since joining the bank in 2014, she's held positions both in the finance and wealth management space. She now leads a team of wealth management coaches and financial and estate planning professionals that support investment advisors in ensuring their clients achieve their life objectives. Estelle Champagne is Senior Manager, Exclusive Remote Advisory Service at National Bank Financial Wealth Management. Estelle began her career at National Bank Financial Wealth Management 8 years ago as a John Molson Co-op intern. Since then, she's worked in various roles supporting senior management in the planning and execution of numerous strategies. She's a licensed IIROC registered representative and is currently completing her master's degree in management at Harvard Extension School. Alexandra Dawson is a full professor and colleague of mine in the Department of Management. Her research focuses on topics such as succession, organizational commitment, and private equity investment decisions in family businesses. Her recent research is also about founders in public firms and women in entrepreneurship and top management teams. She's a recipient of the John Molson Dean's Mid-Career and Established Scholar Awards for Distinguished Scholarship. And she's an associate professor, an associate editor for the Journal of Family Business Strategy and is on the review board of Family Business Review. So let's get right into it and begin our panel discussion. Our first question is as follows. How has the shift to a hybrid work environment impacted women specifically? And what do you think the biggest barriers and facilitators are to women's career advancement that are unique to a hybrid work environment?
Okay, I can kick this off. So I'd like to start by giving some perspective that comes from research. What does research tell us? And I'm going to put my glasses on. Research tells us, so this is research about hybrid work. There are mixed effects, and I think this is something we'll be talking about today. Some of the research looks at the fit between the person and the environment and their work, and there are a lot of very positive benefits from hybrid work. It improves work-life balance, gives more autonomy, there's a more efficient use of time, and this is, I think, something that we all appreciate and think is very important. However, there are some things we need to be aware of, and I think as both as employees, as employers, we all need to be aware of these caveats as we tackle hybrid work. And the main thing is, I think women prefer hybrid work more than men do, 10% more than men, or about 42% of women versus 52% of women, versus 53% of men. And I ask why. And to me, the question is, of course, hybrid work gives more flexibility, this work-life balance, but why doesn't it give it to everybody? Why don't men and women prefer it at the same rate? And women prefer it more than men do because women do more of and this is research on heterosexual couples with children that I'm referring to, but women do more of the housework than men. They take care of the children more than men. They take care of elderly parents or family members more than men, and therefore they're the ones who need the work-life balance more. So I think this is something we can talk about. The other side of the research looks at social roles and stereotypes. What are the expectations that come with gender? And with gender, I'm really talking about men and women here. Because hybrid work can also increase work-family conflict. It creates power differences. There are already power differences between men and women, but if women are doing more of the hybrid work than men, then these power differences are even more evident. Hybrid work could affect access to mentorship and sponsorship. And research shows that already women have a harder time finding or having mentors and sponsors. And if they're doing more hybrid work than in person than men are, this may become worse. So this is something else we should be aware of. There could be assumptions about commitment. And again, this comes with the gender stereotypes. If women are doing more hybrid work, they're not seen. There could be assumptions about how committed they are to their work. And the last thing I'll mention, and then I'll stop, is speaking up and being heard. And this, again, is something that women often have more trouble with than men. And if they're not in the workplace and other people are, it becomes even harder to be heard and to speak up. So these are some points. And I want to make clear, I started with the many benefits of hybrid work, and that's what I would like to highlight, but also a lot of things that I think we need to be aware of in order to manage it. So.
All right, so I can chime in here as well a little bit on the research side of things, just to add to what Alex was saying. And I'm going to pick up on an interesting point I think that you just raised at the end about assumptions of women who are doing hybrid work, that maybe they're not as committed to their work as if they were present in person. And I think that's a really interesting point because that seems to affect women more than men. So a woman who is at home working remotely, it may be assumed that she's less committed to her job, whereas a man who's working at home remotely, we don't necessarily make that same assumption. So this is something that uniquely affects, or not uniquely affects women, but affects women more than it affects men. So I think that's interesting. And I really liked how you highlighted the kind of pros and the cons, because there's a lot of tensions with remote and hybrid working. There are all the benefits that Alex mentioned, but there are also some difficulties as well. One interesting thing that I just wanted to add to give a positive side of things is that there's an interesting finding with remote meetings that shows that women sometimes participate more in discussions in remote meetings because of the fact that there are less social cues about the hierarchy. So we all have the same size box on Zoom, and it's less clear what the roles are. And so sometimes that actually can give a space for women to participate more in remote meetings. So that's an interesting plus of working offsite some of the time. I'll leave it there. You want to chime in?
I think we'll comment more on anecdotes
Perfect.
from what we see, Sophia and I, a bit later.
Excellent. So I'll continue on with the same theme and wondering what are the unique challenges, any additional unique challenges of managing workers in a hybrid environment, and whether we should be managing men and women differently in a hybrid environment.
Maybe I can chime in on that one. I think there are definitely some challenges with hybrid work. You mentioned a few. Are you present? You know what's going on with employees. I think engagement comes up a lot. So with an employee that was kind of engaged before, probably in the hybrid work environment, you aren't going to have much trouble managing that individual because they will be present. And when I say present, I don't mean physically present. I mean engaged and present in your meetings and what you're doing. I think it adds an extra challenge when we have disengaged employees. And we were kind of talking earlier, didn't you have that challenge before? 100%. I would just say as a manager, a little bit tougher to say, how can I re-engage this person? How do I get this person back into conversation? It does, make it a little more challenging when it comes to informal discussions. We said maybe, how do you get access to mentors? How do you get access to sponsors when we're using a hybrid environment? And what can you do for that, right? So what can organizations do for that? Actually, was thinking about a couple examples. You can create sponsorship programs. So actually at National Bank, we did create both a mentorship and a sponsorship program that is kind of forced. So natural sponsorship is a lovely thing. It's the way it should be, but it hasn't always happened that way. So how can we instill that culture? How can we make sure that everyone gets access to sponsors rather than it just be kind of what was there in the past? Historically, men were really good at creating these sponsorship networks. We can diss it, if we will, and say, oh, we've got like these clubs, but to a certain extent, it's camaraderie. They've created units of trust that then sponsor each other throughout the organization. It's kind of human nature. So how do we make that available to women as well? So what we decided to do is create this sponsorship program. We have both men and women being sponsors. And then we went towards a public to say, hey, who's interested? Because being told you're going to be coached or sponsored and you have new interests never works. So we say, who's actually interested, who'd like to be sponsored, who'd like to be mentored? And then we can go forward with the program that's assisted throughout that. So I think that's like to answer what can you maybe do to address some of those issues? That's maybe one of them. And maybe just a second little part on should we manage men and women differently? My opinion is no. I think we need to manage people differently based on what motivates them, based on how you can connect with them, based on the types of personality they have. Are they someone that's motivated when you challenge them and you say, no, that doesn't work? Or are they someone that needs a pat in the back and say, look, this was great, but here are a couple little points that I think maybe you had a blind spot on. So adapt to the individual, whether it's hybrid or in person. I don't think you need to manage men and women in a different manner.
And I would tend to agree 100%. There's no unique challenges to manage women in a hybrid work mode. And obviously I talk just from experience, and when I can see there's no research, I can just tell you there's no difference. It's exactly what Sofia said. You manage people and, they have different personal lives. They have different backgrounds. So you just adapt your management style to each person and not to each gender.
Can I add something from the research? So you were mentioning the sponsorship and mentorship programs. So research shows, and you hinted at this, that men typically have much more informal relationships with mentors, but also sponsors. So, but typically we tend to gravitate towards somebody who's similar to us. So they gravitate towards men historically. But much more informally. So the golf buddy or the guy they go to the gym with. And this means that they have more mentors. And also because the relationship is much more informal, they actually get more out of it. They get more benefits. And, of course, and women on the other side tend to have more of these formal relationships, which can then become also informal and more kind of friendly. But it's obviously we need to do something. So this is what we can do to help, but it's interesting how you get much more out of an informal relationship. And I think that makes sense. The other thing about managing men and women differently, I agree. We need to manage people, but there are also a lot of biases, often things we're not really aware of. We have biases about how we perceive people, how we process information, how we look at people. So I think we obviously shouldn't outwardly manage people differently, but being aware of all these things, I think, is very important. And also, I don't like. I don't want to say we manage men and women differently, because in the literature, when we started talking about stereotypes and women and their careers, it was all about fixing the women. Let's give them programs, let's give them training, let's give them skills. And it's not just about, or it's not about fixing the women. The problem is not the women. We need to fix everybody. It's more of a societal and cultural approach. So of course, I'm in favor. I think we should help the women, but not lose sight of the fact that it's not the women that need to be fixed. We all
couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
We need education. We need to make sure that in the room when we're talking about those challenges, you have both men and women so they can sympathize. Like you had an example, I think, of an employee. And you were saying like, what's a bias? What is she living?
Yeah. So there are some stereotypes that are more feminine sometimes. And I have an employee that's, she's a single mom. She takes care of her 2 kids by herself. So obviously, my approach with her, my expectations will vary depending on what she goes through in her personal life. And as a manager, I make sure that I connect with her as a person. We're both human. We made sure from the start that we agreed that we would keep that transparency, that relationship, so that I think, again, just from experience and what I can see, women tend to feel a lot of guilt towards, not being fully there, or, I have to leave because my kid is sick and all. So my role, I gave myself a mission to not add guilt to that specific employee. And it's like, you have to go take care of your kid. That's your priority. We'll talk about work, when your mind is there. So there are some differences between men and women that are more stereotypical. And that's how we approach things differently. So, yeah.
All right, let me ask another question, building on what we were just talking about, because I love the idea of the sponsorship program at National Bank. And sponsorship, we know sponsorship and mentorship are really important. So I wonder if you can elaborate, or if we can elaborate on the employee and the employer's role or management's role in terms of supporting women's career advancement. So where does the employee fit in? Where does the organization fit in?
I can start. And that's something that I learned very quickly in my career, is that as an employee, you have a big responsibility in taking charge of your career and your progress. I think I came in thinking that the organization is going to know what you want, is going to position you in the right, that's not how it works. So there's some ownership and accountability that you have as an employee. And then as an employer, you have to make sure that you have the structure to help women succeed. And, we talk about the sponsorship program. Well, the data shows that still to this day, there's a lot more men in our industry in the above senior management, like in executive positions. So obviously, when you create a sponsorship program, you don't just create it at the top. You create a sponsorship program from the bottom, right? And you give objectives and KPIs that you can track. So that's something specific. If you want to change things, you have to change things from the core.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's a lesson I had to learn, that I had to take my own personal development into my own hands. And it happened at one point when I was filling out an evaluation when I was at Deloitte, and I said, well, like, I worked hard this year. Like, you got to go fight for me, to my manager at the time. And she said to me, well, is it up to me to say you did a good job this year? Or is it up to you to tell me what you did this year? I kind of went, okay, I guess she has a fair point, you know? So I sat down and I said, okay, what did I do this year? And I wrote why I thought I deserved a good evaluation. And she backed me 100%. But she said, you got to know your worth and you got to be responsible for that. And we talked about this earlier and I loved it. You said, you can't think people are going to guess what you'd like to do. And I said, it's the same in relationships too. You know, you get all frustrated because your significant other can't figure out why you're like in a bad mood. But you got to tell them. So I find in an organization, you got to take your personality. What do I want to work on? As a manager, I have to facilitate that. So let me help you reflect on this. Did you notice your impact in this meeting? Maybe you didn't realize the impact that it had on those around you. So I can reflect back some feedback so that person has additional things to work on. I can create formal programs or maybe agreed informal programs or ways to support you. I can be a sponsor. I can help pull you up, but I got to know what you're interested in. I got to make sure that if I say, hey, let's work on this, you're keen, you engage, you decide to go out and maybe follow an additional training, get other people around you that perspectives on something to be able to grow. So I think we need to be careful to put all of the emphasis on the organization. And I think when I was interviewing, if you will, institutions that I wanted to work for, because I think that's something we need to do. You decide where you're going to work. I think it's a good question to ask. What do you have in place to facilitate growth? What's the approach you take? So if I look at National Bank, there's an entire team that's in charge of culture. We have an HR program that teaches our leaders on how to be coaches, how to ask questions to their people. We do have a diagram of what is the type of leader we would like to have in our organization. What's our mission? What's our vision? That's not going to fit with everyone. But as you go into that organization and you want to develop, you got to know if that fits with your values.
And I'll just add a comment. When we came in and we talked about, you have to be accountable. You have to voice what you want. I'll share just from experience because I've been on the market for 8 years, but at the same time, it still feels new. I think at the beginning, I felt kind of guilty to share that I had ambition. And then I look at my male counterpart, they have no shame, they have no guilt. So I think you have to find everything, it's all about the approach, obviously. I never went in and it's like, I want to become VP tomorrow, but it's like, no, it's totally acceptable to have ambition and to want to grow within an organization. And that took me a little bit of time to kind of feel comfortable with it. So if I could share something, it's like, there's nothing wrong about it. Like you want to, you're ambitious. Good. A lot of people are, and a lot of, go in and own it.
And research backs this up. So women are much better at championing other women than themselves because you feel ashamed or if there's a promotion coming up, men will say, and of course I'm generalizing, but this is what the studies show. The tendency is men will say, sure, I'll take the promotion and then figure out whether they're actually able to do the job. Whereas women will say, oh, I don't think I'm ready. I need another 6 months. I need to work on my skills. And again, these are things we need to be aware of because you've experienced it yourself and research shows that this is very, very common.
You know what I find helped me in my career? I have a lot of male friends at the office. And then I'm not sure about whether I should apply for something. I've got my bullish friends that are like, why not? Like, do it, and that really helped me. I think in the long term, it'd be great if we could shift that a bit. But until then, that was a trick that I had.
If I can just add in, I love the conversation here. And if I could just plug my own research, just to reinforce kind of what's being said here, I really think it's both parties are responsible, I think, for career development. Individuals have to take charge of their own careers, but as well, the organization is there to play a supporting role. And so in some research that I did with my colleague, Kathleen Bois and Alex Lefter, and it was driven by a brilliant student of ours in the Master of Science program, Lynn Zhu, we found that organizations could help individuals to reduce procrastination in terms of their career development. So some people may have a tendency to procrastinate in terms of their own career development, and the organization has a role to play there in terms of providing the resources that people need and to kind of spur them on, and that can get people going and stop delaying. So
I love it. Like, I feel like we could talk so much more about it, about like your surrounding and people, the quality of your network and all that stuff. It's like, maybe we can talk about it in this, like I said, after.
All right. So let me ask another question. How can we support how can we tailor our support towards women of different generations?
So I'll come back to what we talked a bit earlier. The single mom, obviously her needs are a bit different. My Gen Z, female employee might have different needs versus my, close to retirement employee, right? And I think you can see them, and it's all anecdotal, right? But typically, let's say, older employees, their work ethic is like impeccable. Okay. Like I know they work from home, they connect, 15 minutes before they finish when their tasks are like, and then there's a bit more, flexibility. But to be honest, it's about the quality of work, right? So when I look at Gen Z, what he or she brings in is, different than someone else. So we all complement each other. So I think, if we come back to hybrid, well, it's a bit different. Maybe managing a Gen Z that's looking for more flexibility, let's say. She wants to be able to go to the grocery stores during, lunchtime. And maybe the older generation, is not necessarily looking for that. So, and I can relate to my generation, right? I know what I want as a female millennial, for example, but then you have to be curious and ask questions to your employees and your female employees to know what do they really care about, right? Because then your role is just to support. And, we all go in to work, I think, to make sure that we learn, that we grow, but that we enjoy ourselves. Like no one wants to be desperate going into work. So that's kind of the philosophy that I think makes a great team work.
I couldn't agree more with your, like, you can relate to your own. So, personal anecdote, like I used to work at Deloitte. Okay. Work ethic at Deloitte is like you work all the time. You work till 11, 1 a.m. Too bad. It said on the wall at one point, if you balance, go home. If you don't, get a coffee. And it was just, you're working. So that's the work ethic I was introduced to. I thought that was the world. Then I arrived at the bank, and I remember on my first day, I stayed till 6. And one of my employees was like, "What are you doing? You have no work yet." And I was like, "I don't know. I just didn't think I could leave." So I adjusted to a different work ethic. And before COVID, I was sharing, like, I was a totally you must be in the office kind of person. And I was young for that mentality. I'm going to say it like that. I was a bit old school in my ways. And then COVID happened and my values shifted a little bit. And I didn't have a family yet, but I was like, oh, wow, like I can take half an hour in the morning instead of commuting, and I would just sit down and have coffee with my husband. That was pretty incredible. So maybe trying to find a little bit of time for this going forward would be great. During COVID, I got pregnant. I went on mat leave. I'm now back at the office. So I guess all I'm sharing there is like my perception of what was the right type of work. Do we need to be in the office? Do we not? How do we touch all these different generations? Changed as I went through these steps, So I'm not at the next steps yet, but I've got to have empathy for that. Like I totally empathize more with people now that leave at 4:00 to go pick up their kids. I used to be like, oh, I'm the only one in the office past 4. But there are reasons for that, and that doesn't mean that the work ethic isn't there. So I think education, I think being curious, I think understanding what's important to each of the employees and making sure that they're still engaged is what's critical. And there is no recipe that is the right recipe when it comes to how often you have to be in the office.
And it just made me think about something that had nothing to do with different generations, but we talk about having sponsors and mentors and having the right network of people around you. And I think one of the things that you should do when you go in the office, like physically in the office, is have a certain purpose. And that's maybe, so, I think that's a more female thing, to think that you are going to be promoted or evaluated based solely on your performance. Okay. No, there's also perception, and the people that, there are round tables, in a lot of firms, and ours is one of them, and everyone chimes in. So it's not only your work that speaks for yourself, but it's your behavior and the way you contribute to everything. So I would say to everyone, but specifically female, going and have coffees with people and make sure that you learn, you plant seeds for what you want later. Like you can go in and say every week that I go into the office, I go in with a purpose. And on Wednesdays, I'll make sure I have a coffee with someone. So that's something that I'm like is more actionable that you could do on a like weekly basis and go in with purpose. Because if you go in and think like, oh, there's no use for me to go into the office, I can do the same thing from home. Well, try to shift that mindset because there are pros of going physically in, but you just have to make sure they happen.
Angela had mentioned something to me, which was, it's a good cue. If you're uncertain, I would say someone you have a developed relationship with, like virtual probably works quite well. If you're developing a relationship with someone, if you could find some in-person moments, that goes a long way in building that confidence and building that reference and that little thing in the back of the head that remembers that you're there. So when they're working on something, oh, maybe I should call Sofia on that point, just because recently we had an interaction. And it's not, I was present. It's not about sight. It's about the quality of the interaction you were able to have with that person recently. So I don't think we can downplay presence. Some of it is important. Don't go into the office to sit on a Teams call all day.
Yeah. I was just going to say as well, we were talking earlier about kind of when some of these informal things happen and talking about generations and can we be sort of more sensitive, and we joke about the 5 à 7 and it's this lovely informal event and we're having one right now. But 5 à 7 is actually a really difficult time for people who have caregiving responsibilities. So why can't we have 12 à 2? Why can't it be lunch? That might be an easier thing for people of many generations to kind of cope with. And if I could just add one more thing on this sort of generational comment, particularly as it pertains to women, I think something that would be helpful that's talked about in the literature is if we can remove the stigma of talking about some of women's issues. And so there's the 3 M's of women: menstruation, maternity, and menopause. And we should be able to talk about them and how they affect us. And I think that can help us to be more sensitive to the demands that people have and the things that are affecting them.
Love it. And the more like higher management executives will have, the more it'll be talked about because it's not taboo. We all go through it, so I love it.
And also, it's not just a generational thing, right? It's also different life stages. Because obviously millennials and Generation Z were born with a screen in their hands, but it's also life stages. So, I don't know, Generation X, for example, right now are caring about older parents, are you having kids? It's bearing in mind, the different life stages. I mean, I used to work in strategy consulting. The main reason I think why I left and moved to academia was I wanted to start a family. And obviously this was way before the pandemic. There was no option of hybrid work. Maybe I would have stayed. I would have been rich by now. And that's why I started off saying hybrid work does have a lot of advantages, but we need to be aware of all the things that we're talking about. Yeah.
All right, so we'll turn to another question. How can employers address the potential gender bias in promotions and performance evaluations when remote work reduces in-person visibility? And you've sort of touched a little bit on this, right? How can we increase visibility maybe if we're not present in person? So what can organizations do to ensure that hybrid workers aren't disadvantaged when it comes to promotion decisions?
The first thing that comes to mind is hiring committees. And it's not just for women; it's for lots of other groups. But I think that's something we've been trying to work on. So you put a hiring committee in place that is more diverse than, say, the select manager and the people in their immediate surrounding that might be very similar in that we gravitate towards similarity. And you have those people, generally about 5, 6, interview the candidates separately. Come up with their top lists in what order and what their reasons may be, and then you sit them around the table and you debate. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. I think it's a nice step towards helping that from an organization perspective. I think we also need to make sure that our definition of a leader is up to date. So that definition should not be, because we've been saying a lot, men, women. Like I've been on a lot of female committees, and it bothers me when we do that isolation a little bit, right? It's not all men. It's a type. we have a tendency to promote, at least in our industry, I'll speak for our industry, like a type A white male. Okay, so it's a very specific leadership type. So I think rather than go just towards gender and such, it's more about what are the types of approaches, because people from different cultures too, they're going to have a different approach around the table that comes from their upbringing, and it might be more successful, but it's not the one we're used to, with that very dominant presence and that loud voice and that and a certain commitment. So I'd say we have to make sure that our definition of a leader is a little bit more thorough and considers, if you will, hybrid in that respect. It's not the person that's there until 11 every night. It's the person that, hey, how's their team feeling? Are they leading by example? Is their team inspired? Like, what's the results from how their team's performing, right? We got to look a little bit deeper.
The only thing that I would add is, a lot of things are getting better, but like the reality is still there are a lot of discrepancies and inequalities. So I think organizations have a big role to play in that change. Having actionable items to work on, having KPIs. And what's good nowadays is that a lot of the next generations look at those things when they look for employers and when they look into companies to invest in, all the ESG, and that's part of ESG. So I think we're going into the right direction when I look at the next generation. So it's like there's still a lot of work to be done, but we are going in the right direction.
So I would like to add something. My own research is mostly on entrepreneurship. So I study, for example, women entrepreneurs. And as we've been talking about companies and managers, what organizations can do. So an entrepreneur is somebody who's starting their own business. And it's interesting to see a lot of the same things in these women who start businesses, because we imagine whatever the entrepreneur is courageous, is brave, but women tend to self-label themselves. They don't say I'm an entrepreneur, whereas men typically will do it more. They will say, oh, I started a business, or I run this. So words are important, the way we label ourselves. And I think this is quite interesting. Something else that happens to entrepreneurs, to women entrepreneurs, they get less funding. So VCs fund more male-led startups than women-led startups. And there have been experiments that show what kind of questions an entrepreneur who stands up on stage is pitching their own business. Men tend to be asked more promotion-focused questions. So if I give you $1 million, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to grow this business? Women get asked more prevention-focused questions. So what if things don't go too well and I've given you $1 million? What are you going to do? And so the way you're set up for the question, obviously the answer is going to be different. And so I'm saying all this because it is a cultural, it is a societal level that we need to really address. And it starts from education, university, but it has to start much younger. I teach a lot of electives. We have an entrepreneurship a minor in entrepreneurship. I have a lot more males than females. So it really has to start much earlier. And as a university, we can be aware of these things, but it really has to start younger, with our children, with schools, with these panels, and so on.
I actually have a high school that's doing a bit of a test in that regard, and what they were realizing is that a lot of the reasons for it's an issue in our domain too, entrepreneurs in the finance area, they don't come up. We don't have a basin to pick from, and they were saying it had to do with risk, that it's so culturally ingrained in a lot of women to perform and to be perfect and to not take those risks. So they've actually started an entrepreneurial program of I think it's 10 days school program. They've shaved off half a day. And starting in kindergarten till grade 11, you have to come up with a project every year, and the majority of them fail. So every year they do this project. One year they wanted to change the uniform to pants. Now they're doing an ABC's book that they have to actually get published. And these young women are learning to fail younger in hopes that takes away some of that fear, if you will. It's not going to change the interview questions, but hopefully it'll that new generation will be more comfortable with that risk and maybe be more willing to go towards some of these industries.
So building on what you're saying, I'm wondering if you have any advice for women who are navigating their careers in a hybrid work environment. What do you think they should do to make sure that they're not passed over for advancement opportunities? How can they advocate for themselves?
I'll just summarize what I've said before. Like when you go in, because we're talking about hybrid, so when you go into the office, make sure you go in with a purpose. Make sure that you work on your network of people that are going to sponsor you, mentor you. That's my advice. Networking is not taught cool, but in the business world, it's extremely important. So that's my piece of advice.
I was going to give him the same piece of advice. It's you have to surround yourself with people that you trust, that inspire you. And sometimes we have this opinion, if we want to be great, we just got to plow forward and I got to have the answer. And I think it's the complete opposite. I found that the best way to advance and the best way to perform was to have these amazing people around me that saw things differently. That gave me all these blind spots that I hadn't noticed. And they were full of men, women, different backgrounds, all sorts of different perspectives. And those people indirectly, yes, became my mentors. Difference, mentor, and sponsorship, really important. Mentorship's giving you advice that's a little bit more towards you. Sponsorship is actually screaming for you when you're not around. They're promoting you, right? So you want kind of both of those. And it comes from that informal. And to give an example, promotions, for example, I did LEFEA, it's a program to help ambition with women. And really what I got out of that was a bunch of meetings with a bunch of other people that just made us feel good and strong. And one day I said to myself, okay, I've got this manager that I love, but we're really similar. And I've really got to develop this strategy aspect. And I found someone around me that I found was so inspiring and completely different. He's like a dreamer, dreams about a million things. And I was the accountant being like, none of those dreams are going to work. So I was like, I want to go work for you. So I crossed him in the hallway, right? So this is the little part that you can't mimic with work from home, right? With hybrid, the importance of just finding those moments to come in. I crossed him in the hallway and I said, hey, yes, can we grab a coffee? So we went to grab a coffee and I had the guts because I had just gone through this program and been told by a whole bunch of other women to go for it. And I said, I just love to work for you one day in whatever way. Just let me know. And then a couple months later, he had a mat leave and he said, hey, want to come work for me for 10 months and then we'll figure out whatever we can do with you afterwards. And I took that risk. So I would say surround yourself with people. Make sure to have those little in-person moments when you can. Don't be afraid to reach out to those people and say, what do I want? I'd love to try working for you.
Voice your ambition.
And don't be afraid. I went into a work. I hated that job. I did it for 10 months, but I loved working for him. And I did something else 10 months later. So sometimes taking those little risks, making yourself a little uncomfortable, to learn something new and to work with people you love. I think that's what mattered most to me.
I wanted to amplify what you're saying because all the points that you're making are completely supported by research. So even though you didn't get to say the research says, I will say it for you. Research says, be confident. Little confidence goes a long way. And I think women can take a page out of men's playing book in this regard. You got to stand tall, know that you can do it. You got to ask for what you want. If you want a promotion, apply for it. Tell your boss, I want a promotion. Develop a strong network. Get to know people. Don't be shy. Introduce yourself. Hey, I'm Tracy. I want a promotion. And find a sponsor. Find somebody who will champion you. As men and women, we can do a lot on our own, but if you have someone who advocates for you, even when you're not there, or even when you are there, right, and says, I would like to introduce you to Estelle. She's wonderful. You should consider her. That is really a key to getting ahead. So I just wanted to amplify your points because research says that they are true. All right. Thank you. So at this point, we'd like to open the discussion to the audience. Please raise your hand if you have a question for the panel. Someone's going to bring you a mic.
Hi, my name is Antajot and I work in IT industry as a manager. I want to know that you shared some specific advice about networking and, being confident and, voicing your opinion as well. What will be your specific advice if you're working in a hybrid environment or maybe remotely? Because I work in certain remote kind of environment, being in IT industry, to navigate office politics. I'll be very sharp in, saying this comment. And also navigating, you talked about visibility. I mean, when you are at home, you tend to attend a lot of things, your priorities are also, but you also are doing your work and you're meeting your deadlines, you're doing your task, but still there are people, who would sometimes say your availability issues. It could be politics, it could be genuine. I mean, depends on the people. How to navigate all this and just not be a, somebody who's an average worker, but an extraordinary employee of the company at the same time.
If I can start, the first thing I'd say is you can be seen without being physically present, right? We lived it through COVID. And one of the things that I made sure I would do is like book virtual coffees or like virtual chats. So I think that's one thing that you can do. We have all the tools for that. Navigating politics, I think we all have politics, but every company has different politics, right? So finding someone maybe within your company that can explain how it works, maybe in sometimes higher positions because they know how things work around there. And then, you are saying sometimes maybe other people get promoted. Well, then that's what your sponsor is for, right? You have your ambition that you can talk with that person, but that person is around the table maybe when you're not there or if you're there. So I would say find those key people. And don't be ashamed to ask for a sponsor. Like, don't be ashamed to ask for a mentor. Sometimes it doesn't happen organically. You have to ask for that. So I would say work towards those things, and make sure that you book virtual coffees and virtual chats with people. Even if you're remote, you can still do it. You just have to adapt your approach, I would say.
Thank you for giving that advice. Yeah, please.
Sorry, I had two other little ideas, if you don't mind. One was sometimes I found at one point in COVID, like the virtual coffees got a little stale. So sometimes finding another cause for meeting people so you could get implicated. So being on a committee that's organizing an event, being on a committee that's doing something without it, taking up too much of your time, because you got to respect that. But gave me other conversations to have with people and connect with people from other areas of where I'm working, because we're working on a different objective than just our work. And sometimes you connect with people, like we say the 5 à 7. How much you talk about work at the 5 à 7, at some point it pivots, right? So sometimes it's nice to just connect with people on a cause that you guys want to raise money for, perhaps, or something, and that can be done virtually. And for politics, I would say another little thing, depending, I don't know how your structure works, but in my case, I'm in Quebec. I'm in charge of all of Quebec, and I'm positioned in Montreal, which is where our head office is. My colleague, who does the equivalent of me, is in Vancouver. And she tells me all the time she's completely lost on the politics because she's in Vancouver in BC time, as we were talking about earlier. It's relaxed. She's like, what is going on in Montreal? So I'm her in. Okay, so if there is someone that's present that you have a trusted relationship with, you let them be your gossip person. So she calls me and she's like, so what's going on in Montreal? What's the rumor mill up to? So she asks me, and it's funny and we laugh about it, but all that kind of informal rumors just gives her a couple cues on the politics front, just to know kind of what she's up against. So if you do have some colleagues in person, that can help.
I think it also depends a lot on the culture of your company, because some companies will not allow you to find somebody you can chat to about non-work things or ask for a sponsor. So in that case, I think you reach out to your network outside the company. And the network can start from if you went to university or if you go to events such as these ones, because it's also a question of developing the confidence and feeling like you are entitled to ask for certain things. And I think the networking can help a lot with but with one's self-assurance and confidence.
Do we have time for more questions? One more?
Yes, hello. My name is Grace. Earlier, you were speaking about hiring committees. How do you go about selecting the people that are going to be part of your hiring committee?
Such a good question. Also, like, our gros piège, right? It's like, let's do a hiring committee and everyone's the same. I think you're doing your best to get diverse perspective. I'll put it that way. Yeah, sure, you can count number of women, number of men, number of people from different backgrounds, but I think really you're looking for different perspectives. So you can actually have two people that just view things completely differently. I think that's the best way to go about creating your hiring committee. I also think you want to make sure they're not just in the close circle in a perfect world. So again, I'm going to use National Bank as an example. It's my world, but I've got my business line and Estelle's not that far away. Like she should maybe not be on my hiring committee because I work with Estelle on a daily basis. So I'll get like one or two people from the daily basis work and then maybe some people that are more partners, that are stakeholders, that are a little bit outside. They're going to have a different perspective. So again, another example, I'm really on the business front. Maybe I want my IT partner. Because guess what? This person's going to have to work with that IT person or that ops person that's got a really different perspective than like the on the field business. And that might be important too. So I'd say diversity of perspective is what really matters.
No, but I've never done it. Like I've never done a hiring committee. I would say, the goal of a hiring committee is one of the goals is to have as least biases as possible, right? So you're trying to get people that we all have biases. So you have like different biases around the table so that you can challenge each other when you look at a candidate, right? So I think true diversity, not just in ethnicities, not just, in gender, but like true diversity, then it gives you kind of a less biased view of a candidate.
I don't have a watch, so I don't know what time it is.
What time? 6:25.
It's 6:25. So do we have any more questions from the audience? If not, we can maybe go with one more question on my end.
It's not necessarily Canada, but they have what you do because the girls in really service and they don't have products. So what I want to know is there something being done in business to get a company and also what is the research about it?
We don't talk about the 3Ms at National Bank. Like, we don't.
Well, Matt leave, yeah.
No, but I'm saying like we don't talk about the three of them.
No.
So I'm coming out of this also with gained knowledge. Like I'm like, yeah, definitely that should be the topic of our next, meeting. Yeah.
National call.
Yeah, national call. No, but like the more we talk about those things, the more we learn, and I generally think it's a great way of teaching and exposing people to certain things that in our day and age should not be taboo. So I can tell you right now, we have a great program about maternity leave, and obviously like people like Sofia still get promoted while being on maternity leave. Like we've evolved a lot. But I think there's a lot more work to be done with the two other M's, and even math leave. Still can be better.
I have lots of comments, but I'll reserve them for another time. I have heard, on a national bank, I have heard that there are movements to say that there should be like menstruation holiday, not the right word, like sick leave. Like equivalent.
That's not the right word.
No, I know. It's like that you be permitted to take time off and that be a valid reason. Is like we call them personal days or we call them sick days or whatever it may be because you're not feeling well.
I said it because there's no terminology. That's why there is no terminology.
There is no terminology.
Right?
I'll call it personal days, and that it be a valid excuse as a personal day. I've heard that started in certain areas. I wouldn't say it's widespread, but I think that could be an interesting point for that.
Can I ask why it's not talked about in that? And there's so many women working there.
I think it's not just a national bank thing, it's like a cultural thing. I think the more we talk about it in public and have a discussion, the more comfortable everyone will be. I'm not shy, so I wouldn't mind talking to my male boss about it. Like I think the more we give ourselves the right to say, like, that's a total human thing, female thing to go through. So I don't know why it's not talked about more at National Bank, but yeah,
And that's what I was going to say. It's talked about informally.
exactly. Yeah.
So if I can be devil's advocate, what would be our purpose in talking about that at a different level? So like I'm saying in my team, we had a whole team meeting where like I was, 9 months pregnant and everyone started to tell their birth stories and it was hysterical and the guys were freaking out. But like we had the conversation, we laughed about, like we were capable of doing that in our teams, So I'd say we have a culture with that's allowed, but there isn't like that being discussed in big conferences. What do we like, and maybe you know better with the research, like what are we looking to achieve in talking about those things globally?
Well,
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And some countries are starting to implement, I can't remember which country, I think in Europe. Sorry? Spain, yeah. It's not a sick, there's no terminology, I didn't mean to make fun, but there is no terminology. So it's not a sick day, but it's specifically if you have, for people who are menstruating or people who are women who are going through menopause and need the day. So some countries are starting to implement these policies, and there's a certain number of days that you can take, and yeah.
Just to come back to it's not being devil's advocate necessarily, but it's why there was a case just recently, this woman, and she won the case because her boss, who was a white male, was made derogatory comments, and she said, "I'm not feeling well today. My production is not going to be that great." But she's been there for 20 years, and he was just berating her all the time. And she was going through menopause, and that is just, out of this world for many women. And she did win her case. She brought him to court, and he fired her. And, if we're open about talking about these things, then there has to be a lot of education. I go back to education. If we're not talking about it, people don't know that all of what's involved.
Yeah.
And I could guarantee you that our DNI, diversity and inclusion team, is probably talking about it. Yeah. When you talk about like a bank, it's a big boat to shift. So I would say I wouldn't be surprised in like 2 years we have a different conversation. But yeah, I'm convinced that there are discussions. Yeah. It's just nothing's in place yet. And it's unfortunate because it takes a lot of time, but I agree.
And it's like a fine line too, because when I was pregnant, I was like treated like I was handicapped and like everyone had to come help me, So there's a fine line of wanting, seeing like women have problems. We were kind of talking about that earlier. There's an issue with them. No, it's education. It's good to know, be empathetic. Doesn't mean you have to go do my job for me because I'm having a bad day.
Yeah, fine line.
We have time for one more?
Okay.
Hi, this is a great topic because just this morning, one of my staff members got in late and I didn't even know she wasn't in. She came in and she says, "I'm so sorry I'm late." She says, "You know what happened?" She says, "My daughter, who's very young, started her period this morning." She was crying. She was really upset. And I said, "Well, why did you come in?" Yeah. She said, "Well, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say." So my husband decided that he was going to stay home and take care of her. And he's self-employed as well, so he could go back to the office and come back, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, "Do you want to go home now?" And she says, "Well, I'm going to wait till I speak to my husband, see how she's doing." She ended up staying the whole day in the office. And before she left, I said, "How's your daughter? How's it going?" She said, "It wasn't very pretty." And I said, "Tomorrow, don't come in if your daughter is not well." But I brought it up because I've worked in private industry. I've been self-employed. I work in academia now. It's the first time and I've been working for at least 35 years. It's the first time that topic has ever been brought up. And I was like, I wanted to clap and hug her because I'm like, finally, someone's actually talking about it. So I think it's something that should be talked about and considered. Definitely.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a great story. I love it. And I think, what we're talking about is to try to bring some of these things, out of the shadow, I guess, to make it, to have more open conversations. And just to bring it back to the hybrid that we were talking about at the beginning, though, and to come back to the point that Alex kind of had originally made. I mean, one of the lovely things about hybrid work is the flexibility that it does involve, and maybe if, there was a hybrid work environment and if she was able to work from home, maybe today would have been a better day for her because she would have taken care of her daughter, but she would have still been working, but she would have been at home. So there is that benefit, even though there are some tensions and difficulties with hybrid work. That is one of the sort of nice flexibilities that it can allow for people to deal with some of these things.
Yeah.
And that's okay too.
That is also okay. Good to him.
Okay. So I think I got a signal that the time is up. So I want to thank our panelists for a lively and thought-provoking discussion, and of course, to you, our guests, for engaging with us on the topic. And I invite you to join us next door for a lovely networking reception and refreshments, and let's continue the conversation. Thank you very much.